Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Autism Stories. I'm your host, Doug Bletcher, the founder of Autism Personal Coach. Autistic people are the true experts of the autistic experience, and Autism Stories is where we interview autistic people to learn from their stories, experiences, and get their insights. If you would like to be notified about each week's episode of Autism Stories, we suggest you subscribe on your favorite podcast listening platform. We would also appreciate it if you could give us a positive rating and review, as it will help others to learn about autism stories. On today's episode, Rabbi Simcha Weinstein joins me to discuss being a college rabbi, founding the Jewish Autism Network, and the connection of superheroes and marginalized people. We hope you enjoyed today's conversation. Rabbi Simcha, thanks so much for joining me today here on Autism Stories.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yep. I wanted to start off by you're the founder of the Jewish Autism Network. What was the inspiration for you behind that to start your organization?
The inspiration, I guess, was sort of desperation. That I was, my second oldest child is on the autism spectrum. And I guess for many years it's been an evolution. So I'll give you briefly the evolution. That I guess when he was younger, I was a little bit of that dad in denial, like he'll grow out of it and the doctors don't know what they're talking about. I still think that may be true about the doctors, by the way. And that when he was younger, we were kind of in this Disney world of early intervention. And when he hit puberty, everything seemed to change in a nanosecond. And when we needed sort of help and advice the most, there was the least. And that was really when I kind of leaned on other parents for advice, for support. And I really wanted to I felt that was a very crucial age. I think that puberty is difficult for all parents, typical and atypical. So that was my entry point into advocacy, was when my son entered puberty. Although that was the entry point, and I've really evolved in many directions since first writing and speaking and advocating and being a resource for other parents.
Now, making sure that you have input from autistic people seems to be an important aspect of the Jewish Autism Network, as there are autistic people who are on your board and who actively you solicit input from them in creating your content and programming. So, in what ways do you feel like the autistic people that have been a part of your organization have had an impact on maybe changes in your content and programming?
I think initially when I wanted to kind of become involved in autism advocacy, and it's really been, like I said, it's been an evolution, and I've since become more aware and comfortable about my own neurodivergence. I was diagnosed late in life with ADHD, and apparently I'm the only one that never knew this, because whoever I tell, they seem to say, wait a minute, nobody told you this? So I do think, firstly, it is not uncommon for parents of neurodivergent children to themselves have their own experiences with neurodiversity, and very often completely unaware, because I think the literacy and the education was less available in the previous generation. And I think when I first started becoming involved in advocacy, I wanted to be authentic and I didn't want to appropriate. And I did notice this tension between the parents of autistic individuals and self-advocates. I sort of saw that, and initially I thought I was going to become some sort of, I guess, how to describe this, like that trope, autism dad or mom. And then the more I looked into it, I sort of realized I don't think I want to be doing this, and I don't feel really comfortable walking around Target with a GoPro camera pointed at my son. I don't think it's appropriate. I think it's an invasion of his liberty, of his privacy. And I sort of noticed this dynamic And then I started to kind of evolve and really feel that the autistic community were kind of right about a lot of things. Like, I sort of like, I started this Facebook group and I saw that self advocates would get upset from time to time. And then I realized, wait a minute, you're in a space where people are talking about you in front of you. That would like make me uncomfortable. So it just became very obvious to me to include autistic individuals. And I've learned so much about it. I'm almost embarrassed and like I kind of feel like I owe an apology because to me it's so obvious now that why would organizations not include autistic people in their autistic advocacy? Like, who better to, they talk about evidence-based treatments. Well, who could be more evidence-based than an autistic person? So I've learned a lot about my son, myself, and really my world from the autistic community. And I think it's okay to still have some tensions because I think that is always going to be the case when there's parent and children. And no matter how, young or old the children are, I think there is going to be, but then I've sort of evolved into where do I fit in to all of this? And I don't want to hog the conversation, but I'd love to maybe get into where I feel like I fit in as a dad.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was really important you were talking about these Facebook groups because I think as an autistic person, it really minimizes, it really minimizes us when you're not listening to us and, like honoring what we have to say. So I'm curious about when you've kind of like how you just shared that with me and all of our listeners. When you've shared that with other parents, that kind of message, what's been kind of that feedback? Like, have you been able to maybe change a few minds and hearts in the process, or have you gotten a lot of like pushback?
No, I think it's an evolution for parents. Now, I think when parents come into this, they're getting advice from experts, quote unquote, and very often some of those experts are, I'm not saying solely motivated, but there are funding streams for the experts. So I think that parents are pushed in directions that is billable. And I will say there's a lot of time spent amongst self advocates and families, arguing about therapies. But I'm kind of come to the conclusion it doesn't really matter what we say. What matters is what's billable. And I think that's an area where I think that families and self-advocates must be at those tables of what is billable and that kind of higher level of decision making. But I think parents are sort of, are open to change. And very often parents, I mean, look, we all want the same thing. We want our children, young and old, to be happy and to have the happiness that comes from communication and the happiness that comes from independence. And I think where the tensions can come in is that for my son, for him to have the happiness that comes from independence and communication, this kind of third party layer of services and supports. So I think where I come into this, and I think this is what parents are realizing, is that it is our job. We may have our own neurodivergence. We may, in some instances, be autistic, but in many cases, we're not. So I think we have to be careful not to appropriate that. But I do think it's normal that any parents, like to take pictures of their kids and show off about their kids. So, that's not necessarily just sort of, an autism question, but I think that we have to have that sensitivity. And I think parents need to stop focusing more on the autism mom and dad and more about advocacy regarding this third party layer of services and supports, that it is our job to make sure others are doing their job.
One of your experiences as a rabbi is that you've been a college campus rabbi for, I guess, close to 20 years now, which I was really excited to learn about that in researching you because I remember being on a college campus and going to Jewish services. And for me, everyone is different, but for me, like the social aspect of it, I went a few times, but the social aspect just kind of caused a little bit too much anxiety for me. So I'm wondering whether social or otherwise, what would you say are some important things rabbis can do on college campuses to support autistic people and having better experiences in these environments and maybe returning more frequently?
That's a great question. If you would have asked me about being a rabbi on a college campus a month ago, I would have given you very different.
True, true.
It's been a month, Doug. It's been a month.
Yeah.
But I will definitely say that autistic students are very often not given services and support that is evidence based according to atypical evidence based, meaning that very often I think autistic students on campus are expected to camouflage, to mask, to fit in, to be like everyone else, as opposed to just be like themselves. And I think the first thing that rabbis can do is to just ask and include autistic people in their planning, in their advocacy, have a just like Hillels and Chabads have a student board, to have like a board member that is inclusion board, but actual not inclusion that is coming from our lens, but coming from an individual self-advocate lens, not speaking on behalf of somebody, but having somebody speak on behalf of themselves. And that could really mean, I look back now, there have been events that I've run that I felt uncomfortable, that I've been anxiety, and I'm running the thing, where there's just so many people in a room and there's so much noise and there's just so much going on in so many directions that I look back now, it was too much for me. So I think just to include, autistic people and to make some, very simple, I think, accommodations, a quiet room, beanbags, stimming, to have some tools and space for those that need to regulate. And I think just also to normalize the fact that, like I believe neurodiversity affects about 20% of the population. So sometimes these things are spoken about in very sort of like as if it's a sensitive, taboo topic. And that's something I find really annoying and almost ableist. It's not sensitive. It's 20% of the population has ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism. These things are not uncommon. In fact, they're way more common than we may be led to believe. So to have a conversation that's just more normal, these are not special needs. These are like basic needs. And sometimes I feel like in the Jewish community, everyone I know is wearing Lycra, doing a 5-mile run or a triathlon in the name of awareness, when everyone's aware already. Like, like it's kind of like awareness has become almost ableist, and we need to talk just more, just practical, and just to have those kind of practical conversations.
You wrote what I think is a really important article in which you talked about for a long time about your son's autism and what was going at and not talking about what was going on at home due to wanting to keep your son's privacy, as well as your image as kind of a happy-go-lucky rabbi online and in your community. So I'm wondering, since you started to share a little bit more about your experience and how that impacted you, as well as possibly how's that impacted your relationship with your son?
You know, I like to tell people, he's special, but he's not that special, and he can actually be really annoying. I like to say that in terms of just because he's a teenager, like any other teenager. I think writing the article, for me, it was just, and I'm well aware that I was, writing it from my lens and not on his behalf. I'm writing it from my perspective. I just felt I wanted to put the whole story out and almost like puke it out, because I just felt that what we had experienced when he entered puberty, and the fact that the systems of care don't have any, it's something that I'm very passionate about. I'll get to the question. I go on tangents. I got it. But what I'm very passionate about is comorbidity and autism. That if a person is autistic, they are 80% more likely to have anxiety. The mental health comorbidity is 4 to 5 times higher. Yet, the treatment you're going to get in a mental health facility is evidence based on a typical person. So you're suddenly put in an environment that has the evidence is not for an autistic individual. So you could be put in an environment that is not appropriate, in fact, is traumatizing. And what I've learned from self advocates is very often a meltdown is coming from an unmet need. So instead of talking about those unmet needs, we talk about, and this is not the fault of parents, they don't know any better, and they're suddenly faced with an expert, quote unquote, who is heavily medicating. And I'm not really, I don't want to get into, I'm not a doctor, but for me, like, to not talk about unmet needs and only talk about medication and medicating is, I look back now, is a little dangerous. I'm able more now to look at the needs of my son. Are they being met? Is he happy? Is he communicating? I would say that the journey has made us much closer, and we just kind of, and he certainly, even though he's not as verbal, he certainly communicates in his own way. And it's about me understanding, what he's trying to communicate. And I would say we're close. He's a lot of fun. Like, we're both chillers. So, it's like, it's fun. It's a journey.
So something you were talking about a little bit earlier that I wanted to kind of circle back to is that it can be really triggering for us as autistic people to see parents post certain things about their children online. So sometimes it could be about meltdowns or other experiences from their kids. How have you went about deciding what you do or don't share about your son's experiences, whether it's on social media, whether it's with your congregation? How do you go about making those choices?
It's a great question. On the one hand, I don't want to single him out as being any more special than any of my kids. But on the other hand, I do feel like when it comes to Ellie, that he's so lovable, and that so many, being a community leader, that many, I guess, over the years, many people have become sort of, I guess, have an extra love for Ellie and have been part of his journey. So on the other hand, I know there are people that want to know, and also because he doesn't live at home now. He lives in a residential school in Boston. So I know there are others that are sort of invested in him, and I try and sort of post judicious, like not, and no more than my other kids. I sometimes think to myself, like, to put in my Insta story, because I know that when people like see he's doing great, like, it just, like, they feel very invested in his journey. So I'm just careful. Also, I don't want to, like, I don't like to show him in an ableist light, that he is just, if he's doing something that anyone else would do, that is any more or less special. So I'm not looking to get into photographs that are more, I guess, what you would term inspiration porn. So I kind of stay with that. Can feel a little icky. And that's been a journey. That's things that I've sort of evolved on, just learning more and being around the community. And I make mistakes all the time. So it's a matter of learning, and people it's a lesson.
And I think mistakes are okay. If you've made a mistake, you apologize, and then you try to do better. And I think that's an important part of that process.
Yeah. That's one thing I do appreciate from the autistic community, that is a bluntness and an honestness, and also like a move on to the next thingness, So like it's refreshing.
In your background, I see a little figure of Spider-Man. I want to talk to you a little bit about Spider-Man and other things. In addition to being a rabbi, you're also an author. And I'm very interested in one of your books titled How Jewish History, Culture, and Values Shape the Comic Book's Superhero, especially since, and maybe this is such an autistic thing to do. I started from the beginning of Marvel and I'm watching it in chronological order to the end. So I think I'm at about 2017 or 2018 now. I'm wondering, in what ways do you see Jewish history and culture related to characters like the Hulk, Captain America, or Spider Man?
In what way do I see Jewish? I'm putting on my Insta story, by the way.
Okay,
Do you mind?
not at all.
All right. So, in what ways do I see the superhero, like Jewish values and superheroes?
Yes.
I don't know how long you've got for this podcast, but that is the, I'm about to geek out. So in what way? I guess in every way. It was really, I wrote the book because I had read this book Cavalier and Clay, which won the Pulitzer Prize by Michael Chabon, I'm not trying to pronounce his name, is the author, and it was a fictional story about Jewish comic book creators in the 40s, late 30s, and how their creations almost mirrored their own lives as immigrant Jews with double identities, and it was like a metaphor for the immigrant experience. And it was like a fascinating book, and I was like, wow, I wonder what the real comic book creators were like. And I started to go into archives and look at history books, and I was shocked that not just some of them were Jewish, but pretty much all of them were Jewish, and that this was a uniquely Jewish art form where their creations kind of mirrored themselves, that their creators had these double identities, one at home, one at work, created characters. I guess you mentioned Spider-Man, so Stan Lee, born Stanley Lieber, created, he wrote Spider-Man and many of the Marvel superheroes. So for me, it was just, I kind of went down the rabbit hole. And also, I think there was like a crypto Jewish connection that I grew up in England, and there was a lot of anti-Semitism, and I was kind of like this nebbish, nerdy kid, and I sort of used humor as a way to kind of placate the bullies, which is something that like Spider-Man does. He's got that kind of a neurotic, nebbish exterior. For me, it's become, and that book, I mean, I've written other things, but that book really took off. Literally just this past Sunday that they had, this is called Juice, the Jewish Comic Experience, where in Manhattan at the Jewish Center for History, they had the world's first like Jewish comic book experience. And it was like taken really like seriously. And suddenly like I'm on this panel and they're asking questions like you just asked. And I was like thinking to myself, wow, like all these, like 20 years ago, I had all these like sort of interesting little thoughts and musings. And now it's become like part of American culture and canon and history. It's really amazing. And I think just the notion of, and also, ironically, I do think that the superhero lends itself to the autistic experience. The fact that superheroes very often have to camouflage and mask and sort of hide their essential real selves to kind of fit in and be accepted. There's clearly some, and I think just that idea of the outsider insider, it translates not just to autism, but really to anyone that feels marginalized. So I think that's why the Marvel movies, because so many of us can feel marginalized, like, we don't fit in. And I think the superheroes speak to that in everyone. So I think they just kind of tapped into something that maybe they weren't even aware of, how deep it really goes. But I'm glad you asked me about that. It's the gift that keeps giving. It people just keep talking about it. So yeah.
Do you have a favorite Marvel character or show
Yeah,
or movie?
the one you mentioned was Spider-Man. I think because Spidey was like a teenage superhero, and he
Yeah.
kind of had that like very nebbish, neurotic side to him. Yet of all the superheroes, I think he's the most costumed. Like he's trying to
Mm-hmm.
almost hide the most. And then I think that Spider-Man's kind of a metaphor for puberty and that uncomfortable feeling of, and I think that's something that transition from youth to adult, which is something I've still, even though I'm like in my late 40s, I still feel like I'm straddling. I think Spider-Man was really the one that resonated. Also, I like got bullied in school, and there was anti-Semitism on the bus. So like just the fact that, and then I'd go to the synagogue and the rabbi would tell me like, we're light unto the nation and the chosen people. And then I'd get on the bus and someone would give me a wedgie. So like I kind of felt like Spider-Man has like the greatest line in all comic book history: with great power comes great responsibility. Stan Lee once asked me, is that in the Torah? I didn't have the heart to tell him no, so I told him it's in the Midrash. I don't think it is. But yeah, I love Spider-Man. Spidey's the best.
You don't want to disappoint Stan Lee, I guess.
No, no, no. No.
And lastly, how can our listeners learn about you a little bit more and the Jewish Autism Network beyond this conversation?
You know, the Jewish Autism Network is, I'm sort of honored when you asked me, but at the same, it's still evolving. It's really like, it's becoming my own sort of advocacy. I think very much something that I've become passionate about is the comorbidity and the need for different systems to understand, because autism is not just it's holistic. So it affects all systems, just like any human is going to interact with any system of care and system of government. So too, autism is not just the purview of what in New York is called OPWDD, Office of People with Developmental Disability. No, it is a condition that will affect every single system. That's something that I'm very passionate about. And I guess we have a website, jewishautismnetwork.org. We're on Instagram, Jewish Autism Network. And the reason, by the way, I went with the Jewish, because I felt that I could create a change and a conversation in my own community, because that's kind of where my Rolodex is. I just want to say that I'm an advocate and ally to everybody. And right now, I think Jews need all the allies we can get. So everybody of any race, religion, color, or creed, feel free to reach out. And I'm also on Instagram, Rabbi Simcha, RABBI SIMCHA. And I'm kind of like, if you want to know what I'm having for breakfast, you can look at my Instagram, and I post quite a lot of nonsense because it makes me happy.
Well, Rabbi, I really appreciate the conversation. Throughout my life, going to temples and things like that I knew before I was autistic, like something is not right here. And then as I've gotten older and understood that, so I really love that you're trying to bring this conversation to the Jewish community. And I wish you were closer so you could be my rabbi.
Oh my God, you made my day. Anytime. Next time you're in New York, we'll connect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks so much to Rabbi Weinstein for the conversation. To learn more about Rabbi Weinstein and the Jewish Autism Network, please check out the link in the podcast description for this episode. Here at Autism Personal Coach, our clients are the experts, our coaches are the guides. The majority of supports for autistics are not helpful. They try to fix us, not support us. That's why many are confused when we say our clients are the experts of their lived experience. Our clients are the experts for what has worked for them and about the things that they need and want in their lives. Our coaches first listen to our clients, then ask thoughtful questions, offer resources, and strategize with our clients so they can get what they need to thrive. Would you want a guide in your life to coach you to get you the things you desire? If so, then visit autismpersonalcoach.com for more information. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Autism Stories, and if you did, if you could tell a friend, foe, or anyone you know about it so they could have the same enjoyable and educational experience as you when listening to Autism Stories, it would be very much appreciated. Until next time, I'm Doug Bletcher of Autism Personal Coach. Talk to you then.